and welcome to the Associated Black Charities Equity at Work webinar series. My name is Chrissy Thornton, and I'm the president and CEO of Associated Black Charities, ABC. And we are so excited to offer this Equity at Work webinar series, as it is our mission work to help Black professionals, Black workers, to have the tools to navigate the ways that structural racism continue to show up in the workplace and in their lives. And today we will talk about social exclusion in the workplace. In today's modern workplace, there exists a troubling reality for many Black workers. It's subtle but pervasive, and it is a form of social exclusion that significantly impacts their professional trajectory. Many Black people in the workplace, despite their qualifications and hard work, find themselves on the outskirts of important conversations and decision-making circles. Many face this invisible barrier. It might not be outright discrimination, but it is a sense of being othered, subtly left out of the informal networks where critical information flows and key decisions are made. These exclusionary dynamics hinder their ability to be in the know about advancement opportunities and initiatives that are crucial for their professional growth. These instances of social exclusion might seem subtle, but they have significant repercussions. It's not just merely about missing out on a meeting or being left out of a casual conversation or a social engagement. The challenge becomes being absent from the fabric of the organization. It's not just about being in the know, but really about missing out on essential information and being part of the pipeline of decision-making, which hinders their professional growth. And today we are so excited to talk about social exclusion in the workplace. And at this time, I'd like to welcome our esteemed panelists to join me on screen. Welcome, welcome. Today with us, we have Janessa Mondestin and Devon Douglas. And we'll start with you, Devon, and ask you to just introduce yourself and tell us why you believe this discussion around social exclusion is so important today.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Devon Douglas. My pronouns are she, her, and that Douglas is with two S's, like dessert, not desert. I am a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion at a nonprofit law firm on the East Coast. And I can say with authority that talking about inclusion in the workplace, especially for Black women, is of dire importance. And the reason it's of dire importance is because, as Chrissy mentioned, this is about being a part of the fabric of the organization. And if you have people who are not being included in the fabric, you just got a bunch of strings on the floor. People who cannot strengthen your fabric, people who cannot make your fabric more beautiful, both figuratively and literally, if I do say so myself. And so social exclusion creates risk, it creates problems. And if we are more inclusive in the work that we do, if we are more inclusive in the way that we do our work, then we have a stronger, more efficient, and more effective organization, no matter the type.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Janessa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Janessa Mondestin, pronouns she, her. I'm the executive director for Hire HR agency. Originally born out of New York City, but currently here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So this topic here is vital, particularly in this job market that we're in currently, where we have an increased amount of people who are of all sorts out of work or looking for work, being in the situation of quiet quitting or quiet firing, which is at the helm, this conversation about social exclusion, the workplace. The opposite side of social exclusion, just like Devon was talking about, was inclusion in the workplace, which also is a hot topic item, particularly when you're dealing with organizations who are saying, I'm not interested in DEI work any longer. I just want to see productivity, but productivity at the expense of people is always going to be a problem down the road. So this is a phenomenal topic, particularly now to discuss. I'm happy to be here.
So I'm so excited to have both of you with us. And all year long, we've talked about the different ways that structural racism has shown up in the workplace and some of the barriers and obstacles it's created for Black people. And typically, all of them lead to limited access to opportunities and unequal pay and underrepresentation in leadership, and of course, increased microaggressions and bias in the workplace. It seems to me, though, that social exclusion really might be the over-encompassing, issue that keeps Black workers from the relationships that put them in place for some of these opportunities. The research talks about isolation, of course, lack of inclusion, dealing with barriers to networking, and having limited visibility and recognition in the workplace. I'm really excited to delve into your lived experiences because both of you were eager to share today. But I want to talk a little bit about how social exclusion shows up in the workplace. Some of the things that I note when I think about it is really kind of like that out of work experience. Like, what happens after hours? What happens in the meeting after the meeting? Is that what you would gather to really relate to what social exclusion amounts to, or is it more than that?
I would say that it's more than that. It's social exclusion can begin at the very point of onboarding, at the point of not having a role buddy, culture buddy, having rules and regulations, SOPs, standard operating procedures as to how to do your job really well, having disconnect between your job description and the role that you thought that you actually got hired for is the first indicator of social exclusion there, but you didn't know that part.
Wow.
So then you are not able to participate from an inclusion standpoint. You're automatically excluded from the jump. So that's one of the major ways that I'm seeing social exclusion happening, but you don't recognize it until you see the social aspect of it.
Okay.
The ways that when you're not at the after work, events, you're not included in the corporate social networking so that you can be part of and visible with the C-suite level or higher up levels. That's when you usually are noticing it, but it probably has symptoms that happen way before you actually started witnessing it.
Okay, Devon?
There are some other ways too on the systems level, right? So how they can support each other, right? So if in your the design of your promotion structure, how people are promoted, how succession planning is done, that includes the social exclusion versus inclusion conversation as well. When you're talking about who's going to get promoted, you may pat yourself on the back for having a flat organization that's informal, but because of that, people who are not a part of the majority, if you are not including, if you're not being intentional in your inclusivity practices, then people are not going to be promoted, right? If you don't have that type of thing worked into your promotion structure. So although it is the after hours conversations, the water coolers, the who gets invited to someone's baby shower at the office, it's definitely those things, but that type of informal social exclusion is definitely supported by the systems level things inside of an organization, like onboarding, like mentorship, like the promotion and succession planning. So unfortunately, there are two really nasty things that keep the other being disgusting.
They
So
keep it's cyclical, right? So they keep
yes, they
feeding
feed
into
each
one
other.
another.
Yep, exactly.
So that is really interesting as we look at it, because obviously there's bias toward people with whom you're in relationship, whether it's professional relationship or, we have these work relationships that become personal, where people start to know each other's family and people start to enjoy social activities outside of the workplace. But there can be, right in the workplace, just professional relationships that are built on respect, that are built on loyalty. And are Black people really kept away from that and kept out of that in white spaces? Is that typically what you've observed in your experiences?
I think this is one of those things where it can be that way if it is not done, if you aren't breaking those things down intentionally. Like as you mentioned, like biases exist, and people are sometimes unconscious of those biases. And it's like that book, why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria or whatever? And so, yeah, like people are going to do it naturally. But the problem is when you're in leadership at a company, at a school, at an organization, it is your job to make sure that all of your employees have opportunities for success, that you are breaking down those so-called natural bias barriers. And so, yes, I think that it does sometimes happen, enclaves, cliques, as we would call them in high school and middle school. Those things happen, but you have to, that's why, even though we know that, because we know that, that is why it's all the more important to be intentional on the part of the employer being intentional to break down those barriers, because we know that it's happening. It's not like you've reported to research already. It's not like these are just thoughts that Black folks are having and grumbling in the corner. Like, no, this is supported by research. It's supported by anecdotal evidence. And so, yeah, we have to be intentional about breaking those things down.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I think that when it comes back to being intentional about breaking these things down, it begins from the very top. In the top level of leadership should continue doing their DEI journey so they can be aware that they are actually participating in bias and practicing this within an organization. It is also should be well known that not everyone sees socials the same way. I am going to see sisters at work and I'm going to be, hey girl. And if I see someone who's not that, I'd probably be hesitant to be what they call social. And so because my ability to be social depends on cultural competency, somebody might look at that differently and say, well, I tried. We had potluck. I don't do potluck. You know, I don't do some of these things, right? So I think that it means that there needs to be more onus and more responsibility on the organization to continue mastering cultural competency for the diversity that they want coming through the door. When that is not happening there, then it means that some way, somehow, galvanizing people who are like you, who are the minority, right, or global majority in the organization to say, how can we advocate for ourselves as well, instead of sitting there saying that we're going to assimilate with the biases that's already present at work. And that, to me, is also a part of advocacy, but it also is opening you up for more social exclusion. It's a kind of damn if you do, damn if you don't.
It is. So, you know, as I think about it, and I've built the majority of my work experience in non-Black spaces, in white spaces, and you think about if people don't have the competency to have relationships with people of color outside of work, why would we then expect them to be able to form them in work? And I remember, just to move on to lived experience, one of the things I would always look at, especially when I had difficulty with people in the workplaces, I'd go to their Facebook page. And a lot of times when I would look at the friend list, I would realize that, wait a minute, I might be the only Black person they even know or are in any kind of connection with. And that speaks to why they may not be able to communicate with me effectively, or why they may not understand certain things that are cultural or ethnic that show up about me. So how do you change biases in a workplace when people choose not to have diversity in their personal relationships outside of work? And so then in the workplace, they literally do not have the basic skills to consort with people who aren't like them.
This is the job market right now. People are leaving. People are opting out. People are saying, I'd rather be mentally safe and spiritually safe than having to advocate for myself in a place that will never see me as equal. And I think that what has happened, or particularly during the pandemic, they have seen quite a huge array of Black and brown people moving into ranks that they've never seen themselves in before. Like, what do you mean you came in as director? What do you mean you're my manager? And they've never thought for a moment that we would ever elevate to a position of that level in an agency, in an organization. And the backlash that has happened is social exclusion. Is, well, I'm going to create my internal networks in an organization to outcast other people who don't think like me, look like me, or behave like me, so I can maintain my power in an organization and create this subculture that is based off of bias, prejudice, and racism. So I am a big proponent of saying, my Black people, if this is what you're going through, you do not need to stay, but you need to be smart about how you leave, particularly in this job market.
Devon, any thoughts? Yes, I think the thing that I would add to that is it is not as an individual contributor, it is not your responsibility to like save your white colleagues and to rescue them from their willful ignorance. I think that, you know, for me in a director of DEI position, that's part of my job. But as an individual contributor, as a manager of a small team, like it's not your responsibility to force anyone to not be racist. right? Or in other contexts, not be homophobic, not be transphobic. Like that's not your job. And so I think having peace around that is challenging but necessary because we need psychological safety. And like you said, Janessa, people are opting out because they're finding out people don't want to let me not save people from themselves. They want to force me into the position of nanny or babysitter or kindergarten teacher for some of my colleagues. And I actually, did I get a raise? No? Okay. That's not my,
that's not in the description.
I'm gonna go ahead and head out. It's not in that job description. Okay. So I think it is important to recognize that you don't have to put up with just anything. I also believe that like I love that idea of going and seeing people their Facebook friends and who they keep community with.
Yes.
I think that's super important. Maybe you may not want to go on people's Facebook pages, but you can sometimes pick that up. You can tell people who are not interested in creating authentic community. Psychological safety, psychological and the trust that you develop in the workplace is going to be much more difficult, right? When you know that people are not only not in community with Black folks and other people of color, but they have no desire to be, right? They have no desire to be inclusive in how they work together, whether that's someone who reports to you, someone you report to, they're lateral, you really don't have anything to do with them, but you keep bumping into them on the elevator. You can feel that energy coming off of them. But yeah, I absolutely don't think that it's our responsibility unless it's in your job title. It's just not your responsibility to make people change who they are so that you can do your job. Like you pay me to be here. Hello. I would like to be treated with respect, but you can't force people into it.
I think also that might be why a number of us who haven't left but exist in the space choose not to engage. We go into positions and roles not even looking for any level of inclusion. And I think it becomes really difficult. You talked about Black professionals ascending to roles of management and directorships and those kind of things. And it has, at least in my lived experience, been really difficult when you have the majority above you and the majority below you. And it's really difficult to see how people who have been subordinate to me in positions have had access well above my station as their direct hierarchy because of social exclusion and because of inability to relate in the workplace. Have you all seen that happen or experienced that as well?
Absolutely. In that scenario there, it meant that you have to, in my scenario, I had to go in and advocate in a different kind of style, in the way that I had to create my own center of influence with people who can advocate for me in the rooms that I'm not in, especially when I am being excluded. So I recently left a position and started Hire for Hire because of that exact role, where the nepotism that was involved in the organization had allowed people who reported to me or who I had reported to get away with things that I would never be able to get away with if I performed or behaved in the same manner, right? And so having to be one of the most senior Black individuals in the organization, be treated so poorly by other people, it gave an impression to other Black people who have witnessed me saying, why would I try harder? If this is what they're doing with you and you're excellent, why would I even try? And so the problem with that is promotion time, succession planning time, when it comes time for you to advocate for that raise. And so when it becomes that thread through of you will be diminished economically, and not just spiritually, mentally, physically, but also economically, which then affects your livelihood and your household, then the question is it worth it? It's not worth it. Create a game plan to either find a informal sponsorship, informal mentorship within the organization with someone who is above you, which is what I had to go out there and create, was like, I'm going to go meet the COO. Oh, I heard that they like to do whiskey and cigars. All of a sudden, I'm into whiskey and cigars. I'm not, but I will be.
Right.
Or they're going into golfing. Great. I will pick up a couple of lessons out there and have now some reason to connect with someone. Again, though, it means that I am now going above and beyond to be able to level up and get the eye and the ear of someone who has, an opportunity to level me up, even though people in between us have been barriers. It's a difficult situation to navigate, but it requires a lot of strategy and finesse.
It sounds definitely like it. I'm wondering how this shows up at review time, performance review time, right? When Black professionals may not be given the benefit of the doubt, when maybe because of cultural ignorance, you don't understand the nuances of their approaches to communication or supervision. I had a situation in my experience where I supervised a staff member who did the wrong thing. And my response to her by email was not good. Now, I thought that was metered, right? Because the me that I wanted to bring to the table in correction of her was probably a lot more sanctioning than me to just say the two words, not good. And in that scenario, and this was many years ago in my career, I was actually counseled by HR that was not appropriate and professional communication to use with a subordinate, and that it was hurtful to her to hear that she was not good. And I'm thinking, girl, if you only knew like how I wanted to handle this situation. But I remember in that circumstance thinking like, well, you don't understand my colloquialisms. You don't understand the way that I choose to express myself. And so you took it away other than what it was intended to be taken and delivered because you don't understand me and because I have no relationship with you. And so I would think that those instances of us not receiving the benefit of the doubt and people leaning on misunderstanding of how Black people show up at work is frequent. What do you think, Devon?
Absolutely. Not only in the promotion space or like annual review time. I do want to just start by saying with the annual review piece, it would be helpful if they happened annually or whenever they say they're going to have, because that is a thing that happens as well. Not being consistent in your feedback with Black folks, not thinking of that as a priority, because again, in your mind, because of the social side of things and maybe even the structural side of things, you don't see that person's potential. You don't see that they could take over your job in 6 months.
Or they're working 10 times as hard as everyone else.
Exactly. You don't see that, right? So you're like, they don't need to review. You're doing just fine. Don't worry about it, bub. Like that's part of it, that you're not even getting what you're supposed to be getting, right? So many of us don't work for, like Google or a company that is exact in how they do their annual reviews. There are smaller companies, smaller nonprofits that just aren't as systematic in how they do these types of reviews. And so who gets left out first? Who gets excluded first, right? And so that's one part of it. And I do think the conversation piece, or the not knowing colloquialisms, or, how these types of things work, it shows up over and over again. And it almost always hurts us. There are social norms that cause us to feel excluded. But I do want to make sure people know, since I kind of have this unique background of working in both Democratic and Republican politics, it's happened to me in both places.
Wow.
Right? In both places, it doesn't matter if I'm on whatever coast, whatever state, doesn't matter how progressive or conservative people pretend to be, it happens time and time again. And so I think that that's important too, that if we even have these other cultural connections, like political beliefs or passions for a cause, it still happens that you misunderstand me. And sometimes it feels to me, and I don't know about the three of y'all or the audience on Facebook and here on Zoom, but it feels intentional. Like, do you really not understand what I'm saying? Was not good really that bad for real? Did you really miss it that way?
Or did you want to? Did you intend to, right?
Yeah. Was I offensive, or were you offended, kind of thing?
Yes.
Am I intimidating, or are you intimidated? Because those are two different things, and we need to separate those things out. And so, yeah, it definitely comes up at review time, but I see the miscommunication and sometimes the willful misunderstanding, not just in that space, but in multiple spaces at work.
So let's talk about some of these typical like after work events and social activities that, Black people may be excluded from by their white colleagues and peers. So this talks about after work drinks and informal gatherings like happy hours or casual get-togethers, social clubs or groups. So people in the workplace may belong to the same houses of worship. Their children may go to the same schools, and we may be excluded from that commonality. It talks about celebrations. So are we invited to the baby shower showers or the weddings, and those kind of things. And are those the missed opportunities that we would have to build community and build relationship across the racial lines? And I wonder, I remember, and I'm interested in you all telling about some of your specific experiences with exclusion, but I remember working for an organization and my boss was Jewish, and she had invited a number of people to her home to celebrate Rosh Hashanah. And I remember, like, I've played this game both ways. I've played like the include me game. And then I've played the like, I don't even want to be bothered with any of y'all. Like, I've been on both sides of that. But in this instance, I was the only person in the dynamic not included. And I went and was like, I'd like to come, I'd like to learn, invite me. And next thing I knew, me and my kids was up at the Rosh Hashanah celebration at this house, which actually was not uncomfortable for me. It's, you know, I grew up in a very diverse, you know, circumstances, but had I not positioned myself and almost begged to be included, I would not have been, just naturally would not have been considered. On other hands of that, there have been times specifically at conferences, I tend not to go to the bar and drink. You know, there's this thing like, I don't drink, but if I did, I think as a Black woman, it's easier for me to have a drink and be labeled an alcoholic than it is for you to sit at the bar. So I don't even play those games. When the conference is over, I go on to the room or wherever. I don't do any of that after hour stuff. And so in those ways, I've excluded myself from your social networks because I don't want to be a part of them. I really, at this point, don't have interest in being a part of them. How does that show up for you all? How has it showed up in your experiences in the workplace?
I will say very similarly, I can completely understand there. Growing up Muslim and not being able to do a lot of the socializing that people would prefer to be like to work drinks. I've learned to be the non-alcoholic drink. I will have a mocktail any day and be at the bar. And so when people say, what are you drinking? What are you drinking? Then I'll just let them know it's just a ginger ale. You know, it's something simple as that. But what I wanted to emphasize is sometimes it requires for us to be the ones who are advocating for, I will show up. I've been to LGBTQ pride parade, pride parties. I'm not in that identity and I will still show up because I want to be supported. And I want them to know that they have my support. And so they're no longer thinking of excluding me. And therefore it is no longer, we're trying to break down these biases. That again means I have to be the bigger person, which is again, a burden on us for being able to constantly be the bigger person to feel included. But when you get tired of that and when you're like, that's still not enough, you have other options that goes on with that too. So I think on the reverse end of it as well is when I'm going through my own social gatherings, when we're practicing Ramadan and people are just like, oh, we're just gonna leave you alone. I now also have to say, no, come over to the house and break iftar with us. Let's break the fast together, come over to me. And that's where I get to be on the other side of the coin of, hey, I'm gonna break down the social exclusion. And then I'm gonna see who doesn't make it. Because we're breaking iftar for 30 straight days, y'all. You're gonna have to come over at one point. If you're not coming over, right? Then I'm starting to key in and say, oh, you just might not really like being around people who are different. And then that gives me a different understanding about how to deal with that particular person.
Devon?
Yes, so from my perspective, I don't know if it shines through on this video conference, but I am a true extrovert. I'm always going to be in the mix. You talk about it after hours. What? Sign me up. The only thing that stops me from after hours things at conferences, I really like to sleep. So there's a battle going on in my mind between let's hang out with everybody and be everyone's best friend. And, you know, like I'm trying to find balance. So I'm always at things. But I think the issue for me is the difference between being invited and being included. And there have been multiple times where I've been invited to things.
Yes. And
I'm not included in anything. You know, we don't consider how the way you do things affect me, right? For example, deciding to invite me to events and you're like, oh, we're going to watch Gone with the Wind.
Right.
we're
Right.
doing what now? It's one of the greatest movies of all time. And I heard, you're in that sorority. Your sorority sister was in the movie. Shouldn't you enjoy it? And it's like, no, like this is actually really like low-key offensive,
Yeah.
actually. Thanks. And so yeah, there's an absolute difference between being invited and being included. And so what I endeavor to do, like you were saying, Janessa, on the flip side, when I do it, making sure that people are included, whether it is like explicitly social things like, secret snowflake instead of secret Santa or whatever, even that being inclusive of different faith backgrounds and holiday traditions, right?
Mhm.
Deciding things like we're only going to do books, so that people aren't uncomfortable with how the gifts are done, making sure that, we are being mindful of the timing of things, like Hanukkah's at a different time at some years than Christmas and Kwanzaa, right? And so things like that, making sure that when I'm inviting people into the social things that I'm doing, that I am being inclusive and not just checking off a box. Well, I told them they could come. That's not enough. When you're really trying to break down barriers and build trust amongst your colleagues.
So it's really interesting, and you said that I've had some of those experiences recently. I was at an event, and you always navigate, like, I'm sure that was well intentioned, but this comes from not knowing. And I was at an event and they were discussing the venue, and they were stating that the venue was about to celebrate 200 years. And I was counting back the years, like, no, wait a minute now. And they were, advocating for how wonderful that time period was when it was built and blah. And I'm just counting back and I'm like, well, wait a minute now. So there's one thing about us being invited, but not really considered, right? Like there's not a level of sensitivity. There's not a level of engagement with who we are and what we might bring to the table. Then there's another side of that where someone in the chat even mentioned excluding themselves, which I think after many years of kind of being left out, you start to do that to protect yourself. Right? You start to exclude yourself. You start to be okay with not being invited to the baby showers or not, being included in some of those private conversations. And then also, you may start to dim yourself. So obviously in white spaces, I may not tell you everything I did over the weekend. If I was involved in my Jack and Jill chapter, or if I was involved in some real Black stuff, right? I may not discuss that at the water cooler, knowing that there's not space for that, or there might not be understanding, or I might be called upon to, number one, speak for all Black people, or to explain something about myself that I just don't want to feel the need to do. So how much of it is it a burden to be included, right? To take on that burden of explanation, or that burden of, like, I seem to know, and I'm not proclaiming to know all white things, but I seem to understand, like when you all say that you watched, oh God, what is that show with the British people that was, they used to always talk about that show they were watching. Huh?
Downton Abbey?
Downtown Abbey, girl. They sit out there on Monday and they
Listen.
talk about that show like it was scandal. And meanwhile, I done watched Housewives of Atlanta or something, and so I can't even contribute to the conversation. They loved some Downtown Abbey though. So like, where do you draw the line and just say, you know what, I'm going to be a recluse and I'll suffer the consequences? How many Black people do we feel like are really just doing that and saying, I'll just take whatever comes with this?
I think we would be hard pressed to find any Black person working in America that hasn't done it at least once a week. Like, you think there has to be, I think most people do that. I certainly do it, even with my extroversion. There are times where I'm like, you know what, y'all got it. Go ahead. I'm not doing potlucks. Potlucks. That's one of
It's
them.
me. Is that like a Black thing? Because now I'm hearing both
I
of you
don't,
say that. Like, I just don't do a potluck. It never
baby,
happened.
I don't do no
And that's
potluck.
cultural, right? Because we don't eat from everybody's
You
house.
don't eat from everybody's kitchen. And for
Right.
those who don't know, just get on TikTok and look it up. And some of the examples, I just no, I don't do potlucks. You can count me out. I will bring a smoothie and just sit in the corner and slurp a smoothie. Yeah, I am more than willing to protect myself, because the thing that you said that really jumped out at me, not only just potlucks, but having to explain everything about myself all the time. And that's exhausting when you have to constantly code switch, you have to constantly translate your experience. And I say this actually, I am not in the business of translating my soul for anybody.
Oh, I love that. That's a soundbite.
And having to translate my soul over and over and over again, and you want me to do it while I'm not on the clock?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. That's, oof. Yeah. So it's just not going to be a thing where I'm having to constantly explain. Like you mentioned, what you do on the weekend. I accidentally said, oh, yeah, and I was with my sorority sisters doing this, this, and this. And my colleague said, sorority? You're in your 30s. What do you mean doing things with your
Yes.
sorority? You still connect with those people from 15 years? I'm like, oh, Lord Jesus. Now I have to explain what this means and all of that. And then they talk about their experiences. Oh, I remember those guys with throwing up the gang signs and the boots and the this and the that. And it just becomes overwhelming. And so, yeah, I tap out. I
Mm-hmm.
tap out really quickly. If those kind of conversations start to happen, and I will say, yeah, we all have, it takes all kinds. That's my phrase. Well, it takes all kinds. And then that's my exit.
That's your exit.
That's my exit because I'm not, my experience is valid. And once I give you a little taste of it, if you can't handle that Lawry's, then it's time for me to go ahead and
So
move
what
on.
about, and Janessa, you mentioned connecting with other people who can create that safety for you. What when you do that in the workplace, but it's challenged? Have you, I'm sure you have, been having a conversation with a colleague who can relate to your experience, who may have similarities, and then have that other colleague walk up, right, into the conversation that they don't understand and may even feel intimidated or challenged by the fact that you all are connecting at that level? And how has that been navigating those kind of circumstances?
Well, I want to go back to the point that Devon was making. I am a big proponent of putting my HR hat on, that those kinds of conversations that happen in water cooler are not necessary for your job to actually exist. It's not a performance-based activity, right? So, and when people would say, well, what did you do for the weekend? I rested.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And that can pretty much shuts down the conversation. We can focus back on what you pay me for, which is the work. So when I am having a conversation with someone who is in a position of influence and buy-in, it's like, I see you, I see what you're doing here. Fantastic. Wonderful. Someone else comes in who's a bit of a detractor. I pull them into the conversation and introduce them to the person who is actually an advocate for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that they can actually say, oh, someone else of another position, that's a higher level position, thinks highly of Janessa. Fantastic. Maybe I need to think about this different. Maybe I have it. Right. And then that's where I turn around and say, let them do the work for me, particularly when I'm talking to someone who's not Black. Mm-hmm. Particularly when that advocate is someone who is of respect and influence and a position of power in an organization. Let them make that influence for me, and I will tether myself to the situation. And so therefore, it is performance driven. It is about outcomes. It is about impact. And I don't need to, for the lack of a better word, shuck and jive and play the role just so that people can feel comfortable with being.
So I want to move on and talk a little bit about the costs of social exclusion. We've mentioned a few of them, but before I do that, I want to lift the Black men of it all, right? Because we know that privilege varies based on how you show up, right? I always say that transgendered women of color have the least amount of privilege, right? And so when we go up the scale, there lies Black men. Black men who may be being invited and included in the cigar bars and the after work drinking at the bar and the golf outings, because it's assumed that we don't play, even when they are given a little bit of grace to be included in those activities. What do you feel about how Black men are possibly marginalized a little bit less than Black women, and how they may be taking advantage of that inclusion and not necessarily bringing us along?
Silence for me. Nobody wants to come off mute. So I will say this. Let me think back for a second. Meet my mom. I don't think, okay, I have not been in any role post law school where I have had a Black male colleague who was in higher positional authority than except maybe at a small nonprofit, and he was my mentor during law school. So, and it was very small. There were like 15 of us. So I haven't actually had this experience, me personally. But I will say this, I think that generally speaking, that does happen, but as in this statistic a few years ago was correct, and please, someone correct me if I'm wrong, of Black women as a demographic being the most educated demographic. And so I think I constantly come into contact with Black women who are in higher levels of positional authority. And even sometimes that's not what the question is about, but sometimes there's not enough advocacy there.
Right.
But
Oh,
I have
absolutely.
but I actually have not had that experience. The only time that I did have a peer colleague, he was really helpful, a little touchy, but very helpful. Yeah, so I haven't had that. So that's why I was like, Janessa, I hope you come off mute.
Oh, okay.
I have had that scenario because I have put myself in the rooms of mostly men or with people with a lot of power, a lot of privilege. And then one of us are in the room and I'm like, yo, bro. And he's like,
Not today.
and I'm like, don't act like that because they around. We still
Right.
and they're comfortable being the only ones in the room. Now I'm crowding their space because it almost feels competitive that why are you at the whiskey bar? That's not feminine. You talking cigars because that's not your role that you're supposed to be in. Why do you talk productivity and outcomes and results? Because it's very aggressive business strategy. And you should just be thinking about the feelings and the empathy because you're HR. And in that same room, in comparison to, though they may have more influence in that room from being a man, I am the most educated in that room with all my degrees and with all my instances and receipts and legacy of here's the work that I've actually been able to do. So it's almost a double play, the same advocating that I have to do and the influencing that I have to do with white peers, I also have to do them with Black men who are in positions of power, who are not, whose value system is, I want to be the quote, shiny Negro in the room, the only one.
That is resonated here in the chat where someone says, the Black men I have had as my leaders, as well as in higher levels, have not been an ally to me because they have been threatened by me, unfortunately. It's been one of my biggest disappointments I've experienced.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so tethering my advocacy and my value system to Black women, priority, then secondary, it's if I'm familiar with a brother who actually wants to help us, help them, then great. At the same time, in this labor market where they're talking about, oh, we no longer need degrees anymore. We no longer care about your certifications because we are the most educated. I'm like, that parallel there, we've strived so hard to be in that room because of those degrees, because of those extra letters behind our names, that now the job market's saying, oh, that's not necessary. What's necessary now is contacts. What's necessary now is networks. What's necessary now is to be in the rooms where their social clubs are privatized. And that is where I sit there and say, Black men, you need to do better. You also need to do better because you're still never going to be one of them, no matter how hard you try. And
usually, typically have to fall back into the safety of, okay, enough said. I'm gonna shift to a question in the Q&A, and I know it was submitted anonymously. However, I will say this, there's this ongoing question specifically about the younger generation as they're showing up more unapologetically in white spaces, right? Like they are being more authentic. They are less concerned about fitting in. They're less concerned about, playing those acceptability politics. However, I always say like, I am a true, old school soul. And so I know this was probably one of my staff people that submitted this question because it says, is it okay to eat the food, and the examples they gave, watermelon and chicken, that you personally like around white folks? Now, here's what I'm gonna say before y'all even answer. And this is my personal opinion. You can quote me on this. If I have mentored you, if I have supported your career growth, you have heard me say that the answer is hell no. I do not do that. That's part of how I was raised, just in believing that certain things I don't feed into stereotypes. So you will never see me, personally me, at a conference sitting with a plate of watermelon and fried chicken. I just won't give white people that. I just won't give them that picture. Watermelon's delicious. Fried chicken is one of the best things on earth, but I won't give them that. And if I am mentoring, that's something I'm passing on. However, I must say, this new generation is like, we're gonna eat it. We're gonna let the juice run. We're gonna enjoy it. They're just gonna have to deal with it. So how do you feel about this concept of how authenticity excludes or includes in the workplace? And is there a too far? Is there a period of where you should be a little more reserved and thoughtful, or not? Or is this just a Chrissy thing?
I might be, I'm a millennial. I'm smack dab in the middle of being a millennial. And I also, with my intersectionality, that question in particular jumps out at me because I'm also a fat person, right? So
Girls, welcome.
no, and I do
Let's do
fat
the handshake.
advocacy. I do fat advocacy. That's like a part of in my DEI work, as well as just as a human being in my free time. This is the type of work I do. And so my thing is, there's also an added level of fear, may not be the word, but anxiety around this. But I tell you what shifted my thinking on this was learning why watermelon is associated with Black people. And once I learned about that history, I'm like, oh, it's the end of summer. Oh, it's July. It's August.
Devon.
National Watermelon Day is October the 2nd or August
you know
2nd.
the day.
Let me tell you something. I'm gonna be a watermelon eating food because my thing is, and this goes to the whole thing, food, whatever the case, music, whatever the case may be. I think that we focus too much on the white gaze, G-A-Z.
That's true. That is true.
And I am not going to let any white supremacist stop me from enjoying watermelon. There's just no way. It's too good. God gave it to me. You can grow it real easy. I am not going to stop. I'm just not going to stop eating watermelon for people. I just can't do it. And I think that, like you said, personal preference, but there's a certain taking in food, especially the food that like my ancestors grew and that my grandparents still grow. And in the case of chicken, batter and fried hard the first time. That means something to me. It feels like a way of grounding myself. Sometimes even in the middle of the workday, you're stressing me out. I'm about to go get that chicken that I cooked last night for lunch today, so I can ground myself in who I am and what I am and what I believe and all of that, because it's all connected to me. So yes, absolutely. I am going to, y'all got watermelon? That's what I'm bringing to the potluck. I'm bringing watermelon. How about that?
I'm going to accept your perspective. I will say now, obviously, I'm working in a Black space where we're unapologetically Black. So it is very freeing, I must say, to be able to show up in authenticity. It's different. It takes a little bit of, I think, mindset shift. Even for me now, like I've been here for a year and I'm like, oh, that's what we're doing, but I definitely received that. But for whoever on the ABC staff wrote that, the answer is still no. But go ahead, Janessa, I want to hear from you.
I do want to say that when people, because it is a nice catchphrase to attract people, diversity into organizations, to say, be your authentic self at work. And I think it's also important for us to turn around and say, what exactly does that mean for you at the organization? Because the biggest thing that I've experienced in my career is very early on, I was being under the tutelage of other elder Black women who would tell me this: straighten your hair, wear specific outfits, be in this level of white woman feminism to be assimilating into white culture at work. I think that at this time now, being over 40, proven, got my degrees, got everything that I need underneath my belt, where they can't pay me enough to work for them, right? I can turn around and say, I'm no longer centering whiteness in my ability to sustain my livelihood. And so therefore, yeah, maybe my hair will be out in a fro. Maybe I'll shave my entire head bald. Maybe I'll wear a hijab. Maybe I won't. but my ability to show up is not based on their comfort.
Mhm.
If they want to ask me about it, we can go into it because everyone needs to learn. Not everyone knows everything at the, so I am in that scenario a proponent of you bringing your watermelon, chopping up several pieces and say,
We'll
hey,
have to have
you want
watermelon day.
here, you want a watermelon? Do you know the vitamin levels that's in watermelon? Educate them on that. Because this and then when they're like, no, I'm okay, I'm good. Oh, okay, what kind of fruit do you eat? Just apples. Oh, just apples? Oh, okay. You know what I mean, all year
Right,
long.
you're missing out, right? On the
Right? You're missing out. So this is where we get to include people in that social exclusion.
So let's go back to some of the costs. So we talk about career advancement. We talk about the performance evaluation process and how Black people can be harmed during that because of social exclusion. We've touched on mental health. I'd like to get to that a little bit, and then also reduce job satisfaction, because we know that when Black people or anybody really is unhappy in the workplace or marginalized in the workplace, they have an inability to show up as their best selves, as their best contributors, as at the highest levels of their productivity. So let's talk a little bit about the mental health impact of being excluded and how that shows up for job satisfaction or lack thereof.
I will say that the mental health of Black and Brown, or anyone who is in a position where they're being oppressed, is extraordinary, to the point that you don't know how to turn off once you shut off at work. You need a buffer space after work. After 5, you log out. You need someplace else to decompress. You might take that home. You might take that to your spouse, your partner, your children, right? It affects absolutely your sleep cycles change, your eating cycles change, right? You need a little bit more scaffolding and more support to actually come back to a baseline of functionality. So social exclusion, honest to God, is probably something that I think the EEOC should consider, because more people should be filing EEOC complaints about the fact that their mental health has been disturbed with the activities at work. Too often people are pulling the EEOC complaint regimen or protocols after they left an employer, but we need to bring it back to the point of, I'm still working here and I'm going through this, and this needs to be addressed at a legal level, at a state level, and at an organizational level as well.
Mm-hmm. So also let's talk about because a lot of times corporations, and we have allies that watch this webinar to learn, a lot of times corporations will look at the bottom line. So we talked about encouraging Black people who are not safe in the workplace to leave. And so obviously there's costs, related to that lack of employee retention due to social exclusion. What, if anything, if I'm a white employer that's watching this webinar and I want to learn, what, if anything, can I begin to do to right-size this as an issue?
Putting my HR hat on, I'm going to say, first and foremost, go back into your exit interviews. Understand whether or not how many of those exit interviews have you performed stay interviews? So before it became a problem and they're walking out the door, what did you do to keep those people in the door, included in the organization? You'll find probably a disconnect of, if there's a lot of diversity going out the door, you did not do enough to keep them there. You did not actually find a way to actually make them feel like they belong, and beyond belonging is thriving. Did they thrive here? Looking at their performance. So evaluating self, that bit of self-reflection of an organization, is crucial if you're an ally here, thinking about what can I do right now. Is go back, particularly this time of year, go back. Look at all the last 4 years of diversity that walked out the door. Did you do all that you needed to make sure that they stayed? That's pivotal.
I think also employers are scared to just ask the question. I had someone that I was speaking to that is, over operations for a very large corporation. And he mentioned to me that no one at the company had reported any instances of racism or bias in the workplace. And I pointed out to him that that is impossible. And that means that the space wasn't safe enough for them to communicate honestly. Because the corporation or the workplace is going to be a microcosm of society, right? So as racism and these isms exist, they are going to exist also in the workplace. And if people are not reporting that they exist, that's because you haven't created the safe space of trust. And so where's the harm in just asking, right? ask the people that are, within your organization, do they feel safe? Do they feel included? Why isn't that more of that happening?
They're afraid of the answer.
Mm.
You said, where's the harm? Yeah, they know that the harm is getting their feelings hurt. And that's the harm.
I would even say that they know, they just don't want to do something about it. Because it's easier, so white supremacy is easy to sweep things underneath the rug and act like it didn't exist and it was never my problem. They didn't assimilate. But the organization requires for productivity levels to boost, that assimilation cannot occur. So if you're going to be the gatekeeper of it, particularly in HR, who's supposed to be the sounding board, the ombudsman between employer and employee, if they're not doing that work, then we have an issue. And so if we have that issue, you can't resolve it if you're just not addressing it. The other aspect of this is I've been asked that question, and fear of me losing my job at a time where it was pivotal for me to keep my paycheck, I played along. I suffered for it. And then I taught other people to continue on suffering. So it becomes like an endemic situation with Black people saying, you know what, there's not really a problem here. I'm going to play small. And that is where I'm trying to say here today, choose otherwise. Because it's
amazing. Yeah. What about the tokenism of it all, right? Because there's always somebody that might not be socially excluded, right? Like that might be the one that has broken through the doors of exclusion, right? That might be the one that they can point to and say, but Chrissy is at the barbecue, but Chrissy came to the baby shower, but Chrissy goes out for drinks with us. What about the tokenism? And do we look at it as an abandonment of the rest of us when someone of color chooses to participate that way?
Well, I've been in that role. I've held that position, that title even is how it felt. I previously worked for the mayor of a mid-sized city, and he is a conservative. And I came into the role and I thought all the Black folks were gonna be so excited. Like, we got somebody, on the inside. This is gonna be so great.
No.
And that is not what happened. Okay. Yeah. The number of emails, phone calls, taps on the shoulder after church that I got, and people were very explicit. You're just window dressing. You're just like Black folks telling me to my face, you're a token. You won't get anything accomplished. No, I'm not going to participate in your community events because it's not going to work. And that was frustrating because at the time, I fully believed that local government was the way to solve our problems and that we could really get it done. And call me Pollyanna or whatever, and maybe a little bit of hubris in believing in what I could do. I believed in myself, and I believed in the type of work that I did, in my work ethic. And so I do think that one of the things that helped me during that time was to constantly reassure you're not being left behind. You do actually have a voice in this space. Now, the problem was my leader made me out to be a liar. That was the problem. And that folks in my community were absolutely correct, which hurt. I mean, you want to talk about pain? It hurt because I really wanted to be a bridge. But I didn't even get the opportunity to do that. It was the bridge to nowhere is what I was. And so absolutely, I know how it is to be in that position. And now that I'm, I lived a little more and I've experienced more, I definitely can understand why people would always feel that way. I think what we do have to recognize those when we do have those type of opportunities. I love Blaxploitation flicks. I don't know if there's any other people in here who love movies from like the 70s. Those are my jam, 70s and 80s. And The Spook Who Sat by the Door is one of my favorites. And it's just so good. But anyway, the whole theory is in order to get something accomplished, and we have to have people, like if it's a war, we have to have people who are foot soldiers, people who are spies, people who are generals, so on and so forth. And if we can look at our roles in that way, that we're moving whatever thing forward, whatever thing we're trying to progress, and come together and see, like, both if you're the spy who's on the inside, and if you're a general, and if you're a foot soldier, and if you're the Navy and the Air Force, whoever, whatever your role is, know your role well and understand how everybody works together. It literally does take everyone to make Black progress happen.
And you need some people on the inside to do
you
that.
have to.
Okay.
You just have to, or it's not going to get done. How are you going to know how you know what's happening next? So you have to have that, but it is incumbent upon the person who has more privilege. To whom much is given, much is required. So it was incumbent upon me, being a chief in that office, to talk to folks and let people know what's going on, and give my hand to people and to pave a way for more people. When I was in that role and had the opportunity to hire people, I hired 3 Black women. Right. So that I was setting that up and moving folks forward. So I can see, I don't love tokenism. It shouldn't be a token. There still shouldn't be firsts of things with Black folks anywhere, right?
Yeah.
First and onlys, right? We should also not have this idea that because Barack Obama did it, all you other Black folks should be able to get it done. Because Devon did it, everybody else should do it. That's not okay. So no, tokenism is a form of white supremacy and racism. But if you do find yourself in that position, use your power.
Yeah.
Even
I
if
think
it's
that's
smaller.
important to be in that role with a little bit of strategy. Too often I have seen people function in that role with like self-aggrandizing themselves and not really using that positioning to move any cause forward. And I'll give you an example. I've never been in that role. I've always been just a little bit too outspoken to have been like the chosen one. But I did have a role at one point in which someone, a higher level person, a white man, asked me why I couldn't be more like this particular Black woman in the organization, who, by the way, played very small. Now, outside of work, she went to an HBCU. She was D9. She was, her family was, at the cookout playing dominoes and spades just like mine. Like, she was sister, right? But she played a role in the organization to be acceptable. And so then she set the standard for, how Black people should show up. And it was very docile, very, accepting, very non-controversial, not confrontational, not assertive and aggressive. That was not who she was on the outside, but it's who she, and maybe that's how she had to put herself forward to survive. I'm not sure, but I do think that when people do that, it's definitely harmful to all of us as a whole. Have you encountered anyone that is in that role and not using that power for good?
I think that in that role, it is partnering with that person anyway and saying, could you at least watch my back if you're not going to front? Could you pull me aside when you're like, you've gone a bit on the deep end, you need to refine. So even then, when people are in that quote unquote token role and they want to remain docile, they want to be unscathed, I always sit there and think they probably have their own reasons at home why they need to maintain the status quo. They might be the primary income earner, and you know what? I'm not going to rock the boat because I need this money to put my kids through school. Great. I can afford to rock the boat. Can you watch my back? Who do I need to know? Who needs to move the needle on that part?
Give me a heads up.
Give me a heads up in that. And I won't mention you, and you can just sidebar me, right? And we can continue on moving forward. And I think there's a play for everyone who's in that. And I think it's really important when you start in your organization to understand what's in it for everyone who's Black at that company. What's in it for you? So I know how to play my role with you, because not everyone who's kinfolk. Some people will just, I ain't playing with you. I'm not gonna mess up my spot.
That's right. That's right. And someone just put in the chat, that's one of the reasons that communications among Black people in different roles is very important to build a foundation of trust. And I absolutely agree. What I will say is the fall from that positioning is really, really long, right? And so many, many years later, that same individual who kind of, we looked at as more of a sellout, not, and I'm glad that you offered this different frame of thought that people have to play roles and that sometimes people do what they need to do, because I appreciate hearing that tonight. But we looked at her at the time as someone who was making the workplace harder for the rest of us. And the fall from that is really, really long, meaning that when you play games, right? Like sometimes you get what happens to people who play games, and you had a perception of being accepted and forgot that you weren't. And now, right, just, just recently to find out that that person has fallen very, very roughly from that role because you're still who you are. And at the end of the day, you still have all of the systemic things that the rest of us face. It might have been nice for a little bit of time, but you're still who you are. So let's talk a little bit about what Black people can do. We got to fix this, right? We have to, know how to navigate this to our benefit. And we want the allies who are watching to know that we're doing this, right? And that this is a Black tax, that on top of doing our work and our job and fulfilling and succeeding and overachieving what we've been called to do, we're behind the scenes navigating some of this stuff as well. And so when we look at how Black workers can navigate social exclusion in the workplace, one of the pieces of guidance the research gives is to build a support network, connect with colleagues who share similar experiences, who support inclusion, and have that support network to provide emotional support. What do we think about that in these ERGs and these affinity groups? How do we feel about those?
I have plenty to say about ERGs.
Yeah.
ERGs. I don't think I think networking is important. It does not need to happen within the business structure because I'm not here to report back to you how you should do your bottom line better. And I'm not receiving a benefit of that. So my affinity, my loyalty is to us. And so we can have our ERG outside of work. And if we're going to network and network well, I want to know who your competitor is and network with the Black people at your competitor too, to see what they're doing different, what's happening over there at that organization. So that this is a global network now. We're no longer tethered to a zip code or what's happening in our state. So if I'm in a particular role as a director, I'm going to find out who else is director doing the same kind of work so I can level up and be seen amongst us so that we can internally mobile throughout us and not worry about the confines of an workplace.
Any thoughts, Devon?
About ERGs?
ERGs are just seeking supportive networks, either inside or outside of the workplace, and what that looks like for us. Yeah, I'm not an ERG fan either.
Yeah, ERGs without purpose don't make sense to me.
Yeah.
So I would say something that I heard at the Schreiber Center for Poverty Law. They have their Racial Justice Institute kind of annual conference, annual convening. And one of the things that we talked about was finding your people outside of work. I am 100% in alignment with Janessa on this, that especially when you're in a social justice organization, you're thinking that oh, we're all going to be so aligned on this and it's going to feel so good. And then you find out that maybe people don't actually believe the same things that even the mission says, let alone agree with how you approach that. And so I absolutely agree to find your people outside of work. And it's also easier than to, spill tea with people who aren't going to be in front of you at a meeting the next day, right? So you can really process a bit better because there's also, loyalties and allegiances that some of those skin folk may have to other people, and that's a person that you have a problem with, and you can see their behavior, and then you can't tell maybe necessarily that skin folk you're playing small and that person is horrible. So I think that building your network outside of your own office, and I love that with competitors, that's good. Spend time with those folks to develop that community that you need, because it is so wide. It doesn't have to just even be confined to, you work at McDonald's and you go to Burger King across the street. You can be going to whoever in Ghana. You can go to whoever in Haiti, right? You do not have to focus only on the people that are literally next door. Your next door can be across the globe.
And what do we think about workplaces who, to counteract some of this known bias and known racism in the workplace, try to do things that they consider more inclusive? We're celebrating Juneteenth. We're having Black History Month potluck, or we're doing, Martin Luther King things, and bringing these things forward to give Black people an opportunity, I think, to expose more of their culture in the workplace. How do we feel about those things? And how do we suggest that Black people show up to those opportunities, or not? Now, this is from the
And
crew that said they were perhaps celebrating Watermelon Day. So I know you all.
I
coming
do
right.
celebrate
So,
watermelon. I do. Yeah. Yeah. So the first thing I'll say about like, I don't know, I think it goes from employer to employer.
mhm.
In my current employment, people really like the emails about, happy Diwali and like it's Black History Month. Here's your Black History Month fact. Like people
Uh-huh.
really like that in this particular organization. That hasn't held true in other organizations. So I think it depends on your work culture, whether or not that feels good. And it feels
Authentic, like good,
authentic,
from a
right?
genuine place. Yeah.
Right. So sometimes it's that thing that you were talking about, Janessa, like, okay, you've talked to me about Seinfeld and Friends and Downton Abbey all year. Let me tell you a little bit about Insecure. It's really good. Let me tell you, we can compare and contrast the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with New Bel-Air. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. I just think that it depends on the authenticity. Again, it's that psychological safety. It's that trust, as my friend is saying, heavy on the knots, especially if they aren't giving you the day off, but making money off of the day. I'm guessing in reference to Juneteenth.
Yeah.
Yeah, like certain stuff I do, like Juneteenth, I feel like should still be ours to contemplate and spend time with. But if any of you don't know, there's also Black August that is gaining steam again. It doesn't need to be something that happens in the workplace. Again, just to let Black folks know we can still have sacred spaces that don't have to be shared with everybody. But as far as the workplace, like emails, and we're going to decorate everything in red, black, and green during the month of February. How do you like that, Black people? Like, that's annoying, right?
Yeah, isn't it?
It's annoying. That's annoying. But I think that's one of those opt-in, opt-outs to decide when you're gonna do it. If y'all are gonna be doing potlucks, probably not. I can slide you a cookbook though. Okay. You
Yeah.
can enjoy that. But I'm not going to no potluck. I'm just not gonna do it. I don't care if
I have to find this. You just reminded me. There was a video back in the day, and I need to find it and like share it on LinkedIn, where they were celebrating, like, I don't know, it was Black History Month or something in a white office, and the people came in with like African garb, and they started doing like the song from like The Circle of Life from Lion King and doing all these things. And it was like so just that satirical, right? Like, but I used to share that in spaces with my white colleagues to show them like this is how this comes across sometimes. I had a situation, because I do think sometimes people are trying and they don't know what to do. It's up to us on whether we want to teach, whether we want to give grace, whether we want to be offended. I had a situation where I was working for a company where I was one of maybe the only Black person, and it was right after the verdict for the Trayvon Martin case. And my direct supervisor sent an all staff email asking everyone to, like, I don't know if it was like pray for me or consider me, to really keep me in their thoughts and prayers on that day, because I, the toil that I must be going through. And I was, right? Like everybody was, but why aren't you? Like, why was it about me? But at the same time, as I thought about it, and I did address it with him directly, but was he trying? I guess. Was he just ignorant and misinformed? Absolutely. How do we start to address these microaggressions? Keep the job if that's what we want, but address these possibly well-intended displays of ignorance that happen in the name of inclusion?
I think one, it is advocating, I keep saying that word, advocate, again and again and again. Hire someone like Devon, who can actually be the person who can help keep the company accountable for what they say and what they do and how it shows up. Because they can't do this alone. And if you are reporting up to someone, you can't do it alone either. That's not your role. Your role is to say, hey, I feel like I've been microaggressed and I feel like we could be doing better. Here's how we could be doing better. Here's recommendation A, B, C. And I know Devon, sorry about my dog. I know Devon can actually bring this down for you in a way that makes it easy and accessible and seamless. That's what's needed there. So if you got to protect yourself, do that, but don't put yourself out there to be a martyr, because you might be labeled the problem child.
Any other thoughts, Devon?
I'm sorry, but the you might be labeled a problem child just really just my whole train of thought is gone because that
Hit you. Yeah.
that really resonated with me really heavily. That really resonated with me. And I imagine it resonates with others too. When you continually stick your neck out there to explain to people that the way you're doing things are wrong. Like that's wrong. These companies, we're all a family and we love each other. Well, the way you love me hurts me. So how do we now what do we do? And so that just really touched me because I know how it feels to keep going to bat, to keep trying to get folks to understand this, either as a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion or not. Doesn't matter what my title is, because that is, I'm a fighter, like to fight for things. Are you a lover or a fighter? I love to fight, right? So I want to go to bat, but man, you keep getting knocked back. And so I like what Janessa had talked about earlier about let's just opt out. I don't have to be in the matrix. This sucks, this is painful. And what you'll see, that quiet quitting, where it was an aha moment. You have
Yes.
quiet quitting, and my quiet quitting gets loud. It's going to lead to a real big loud quit when I can no longer handle these microaggressions, sometimes I feel like purposeful mispronunciation of my name. And my name is 2 syllables. It's D and then it's Vaughn. It's really not hard. And people will consistently call me Devin. And it may not matter to them, but it matters to me. I remember on Twitter a long time ago when it was still Twitter, someone had told this story about a white man at work, mispronouncing her name. So what did she do? She continued to call him a different stereotypical white guy name until he caught on. And then not only did she call him that, when people would ask questions about work he was supposed to be doing, she said, "Oh, well, Bill did it. Oh, you'll just have to ask Robert." She just sowing seeds of confusion all over the place. Because if you cannot seem to figure out how to say Devon or Keisha or Abba or whatever the case may, if you can't figure that out, then sure, let's play games. Let's play some games. And so I know that feeling though of yelling that, and you resort to new tactics because you're tired of being worn down all the time. So I don't know. I had something else to say, but Janessa, that problem child, that hit me. That hit me in my heart.
Well, and that is reasonable. Like we're used to, specifically as women, the angry Black woman, we're used to these other designations, but being the constant person in advocacy, constantly in confrontation, constantly addressing ills and doing these things, honestly does make you the problem child, right? Like you're the one that in some cases they don't even mind if you leave because they've decided that you are the cause of all of the problems in the organization. They've put the responsibility on you so that they don't have to accept it themselves. But oh, go ahead, Janice.
And they've taken your best work, which remains there. And this is the reason why I say you have to reconcile yourself at that day, at that moment to say, do I have to show up at 120%? Because they're that work stays with them and I'm gone. And they're clapping themselves up for the work that I did. And that mental stress there is where we have to sit there and be in community with one another. And someone has to say, sis, it's your time now.
I was going to ask you that, like, how do we start to show up for one another as Black people to address the self-care and the well-being that we need to navigate this and a million other things that we face being Black people? How do we show up for each other?
It starts with investing in ourselves, investing in moments like this. Someone today is like, I didn't show up for this call because this was too late. But this call can change your life right now, right? Watch the replay. Go out and say, okay, when there's a DEI or a BIPOC first, one and only kind of group where we can hold space for one another, join it for it. Pay it forward, because this is what's going to help us shift the narrative of how we show up at work collectively. Don't wait for the ERG. The ERG is the other pill. You don't want that pill, right? We're talking about red pill, blue pill. You don't want that pill. It's a yellow pill. It's a facade. So we need to find a way to be outside of work, supporting each other at work, about work, because we take this home with us, and our entire community feels this when we are ill because of work.
And I'll turn it to Devon, but what does it look like for us to be in alignment? I was walking with some of my younger staff members the other day, and there was an older Black gentleman kind of walking past us on the sidewalk, and I spoke to him, and they didn't, which I don't indict them for that. But one of the things I mentioned to them, a lot of times if you're from Baltimore, which I'm not, you're used to Black people, right? Black people everywhere. Having grown up primarily around not as many Black people, it was a practice that I was taught at a younger age, that when you see Black people, you speak, you got to give the head nod, something. You have to acknowledge them, right? Because you're making them seen and acknowledging their presence. So I still do that to today. It's rare that I will walk in a room and see Black people in a white environment and I won't make my way to them and I won't speak to them. So how do we align with one another in a way that's helpful?
Yeah, I think that the first thing, and we haven't really hit on this, but like a little bit, that Black folks aren't a monolith on all the things, right? So the first thing when we're talking about inside the organization is just pick one thing that we agree on, right? And like you had said, Janessa, about the person who's been placed in like a high-ranking tokenized position, like we don't got to agree on what the CEO is doing. You can be as loud or as quiet as you want, but can we agree that we're not going to throw each other under the bus, or we're not going to, whatever. If we can have those kinds of things, I think that makes sense. We just pick one thing. We don't have to do we just all gonna not go to the ERG or whatever the case may be. We're not gonna participate in the potluck. That's the agreement. Yeah. Everybody agree, that kind of, whatever the thing is, big or small, or we're all going to strategic planning's going on. We are all gonna put our all into the strategic planning process, so they don't accuse us of learned helplessness or whatever the case may be, right? We're all gonna participate. That's the agreement. There's that. And the other thing about supporting each other in the workplace, again, this is cultural, just depends on your work culture and what you're comfortable with. But I like having my work sister, my work mom, or my work whoever, having one person that we may not be best friends outside of work or whatever the case may be, but someone that I can depend on and who can depend on me. It's mutual, right? My work bestie, we went to Beyonce together back in August. We threw her a bridal shower, like that kind of stuff. And I think that that's important because sometimes during the day, you need someone with whom to decompress, especially if you're in the hybrid or the in-office type of workspace, right? You need to have a person. If you're someone like me, an extrovert who really likes connecting with people, if I don't have another person to, like, girl, am I tripping?
Am I tripping?
Am I tripping? Let me know.
Right.
Like sometimes you need that internal person who has the context to tell you. Because my mom, I usually will call her and say, Mama, am I tripping? But she's my mom. So she's always going to tell me, no, you're not. Fight it. Do it. So sometimes you need someone to give you perspective. And I think having a person is really important.
That is amazing. And I agree with you so much that you need the opportunity to take the mask off. And sometimes you can't wait to get home to do that. That has to happen in the middle of the day, sometimes in the middle of the call, the meeting, or whatever the case is. You need the ability to just experience the moment the way you show up in the moment. And so aligning and finding safe people in the workplace can help that. So before we close, I would like to give both of you just an opportunity to give some final remarks about this topic or anything else that you would like to lift. I think we have learned from one another, and we have hopefully blessed the people who are watching and will watch the replay. But I want to give you an opportunity to just circle back and share some closing thoughts on this topic that you believe will help Black workers be more successful. And we'll start with Janessa.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. This was a wonderful conversation. I absolutely did learn a lot from all of you, both of you. And also reading the comments in the chat, and I was catching up and I was like, wow, there's gems in that too. I will say that at the end of the day, reconcile between your core values as to what you bring to the table and whether or not that organization can show up for you the same way that you reciprocate to them on a regular basis. Constantly do this type of my win book, writing down what I've done really well and what I'm receiving from this organization, and know that you are not stuck in your current situation. Start there. And if it does not measure up, try other avenues and seek other opportunities, first in community with other people, particularly your competitors, because they might have a slot open for you. They just didn't know that you were open for it. So that's what I'll say there.
Thank you so much. Devon?
I just want to say thank you, Chrissy and ABC, for inviting me to do this. I know there are a lot of people who want to talk about this conversation. I'm so thankful to the participants today who are in the chat and those who are just listening. This is near and dear to my heart, as I have been excluded and now work to make sure that as many people as I can include get included. And so my takeaways and my advice are that there's no one size fit all. It doesn't exist. What you have to do for you, Black person, is make sure that your soul is taken care of. And I mean that as in the essence of you. And so sometimes that's going to look like welcoming that exclusion. Like, okay, I'm good. And sometimes it's going to mean asking for inclusion, advocating for yourself, finding someone with more positional authority or longevity in the organization to be your co-advocate and mentor. And it also means bringing people along with you, right? So there are different levels to this, and there's different ways to protect yourself, but make sure you protect you. Also, the thing that we did not talk about, but I think is really important, is get rest. Rest is your birthright. It belongs to you. And sometimes that looks like tapping out once again, as Janessa was mentioning. You deserve the world. Your workplace isn't going to be the place where you get it.
Wow.
So make sure you take care of you no matter what. If you're being excluded and you want to be included, find somewhere else to be included. And if you're being excluded and you want to fight and work to change that in that particular office, do it, but make sure that you protect yourself during that process.
Thank you so much. I will say that this, among all of the other conversations we've had about equity at work this year, have been so fulfilling and rewarding. I've learned so much, and we've gotten such great feedback from participants who are just enamored with the fact that we're having these open discussions unapologetically. We're trying to help people using our lived experience and our testimonies to help people have the opportunity to do better, find some peace, and have the tools and resources needed to navigate some of these structures. So throughout this year, we have talked about so many different topics. And in December, you will see Associated Black Charities start to recap some of the great sound bites and some of the great tools we've learned from those conversations. But we will close the year with another Equity at Work webinar where our topic will actually be fighting diversity fatigue. Listen, a lot of people started this work in 2020 after George Floyd. A lot of people, to hear them talk, they're sick of it. They're sick of hearing us push it forward. They're sick of talking about it. They're sick of investing in it. And so we're going to talk about what it looks like to fight that diversity fatigue in December. And so we ask that you join us for Equity at Work webinar then. And for Associated Black Charities, I am Chrissy Thornton. Good night.